I thought I would start out explaining the new orchard process by looking at the one that I put in right next to the field where I'm going to be working in. This is now in its 5th year. These are American persimmons, pretty much loaded with lots of fruit. And this field has persimmons, pawpaws, and asparagus, and used to have raspberries, which is now more like pollinator habitat. And so 5 years ago, we moldboard plowed this field, which is reprehensible in some senses because it's pretty bad for the soil health. We've got a little bit of eastern tent caterpillar here, or no, this is fall webworm, looks like. They don't do too much damage to the persimmons. I don't do anything for the persimmons other than we just pick the fruits. And we did have a bad infestation of bagworm one year, which did some damage, but that's the only thing that's happened so far. That's why we chose the trees that we did. Many trees are very difficult to grow in this climate and need a lot of care and babying, and that's not what this was about. So anyway, as far as establishing this orchard, we moldboard plowed the ground, and it's very destructive. It's the inversion tillage that you read a lot about, and it's what destroyed the Midwest and all of that. And so it's a very heavy-handed tool, but it allows you to really get all the perennial weeds out, loosen the soil so that planting is easy. And then because I didn't really have access to a lot of mulch, and I certainly didn't have access to any time, I did this all myself, or really labor at that time. I wanted it to be as easy as possible and as effective as possible for the time that I had to put into it. So I plowed it, I planted the trees, and then I kept the ground cultivated bare for a year, almost a year. The first growing season was bare ground. So that meant I would actually, and I'll show you how this goes later, I would actually straddle the tree rows with a little cultivating tractor, a Farmall Cub, and cultivate them like I would one row of vegetables. And so there was the asparagus rows, the raspberry, the 3 rows of trees, and each of them, the spacing was such that I could just cultivate and keep that single row in the middle unhit, and then everything else was disturbed. Probably I did it maybe 5 times that season. So it's not the type of thing that you expect to see in a permaculture establishment, because you think about mulch and all of that, and that is better in many ways. But that was essentially the last major soil disturbance that this field will probably ever experience, hopefully in my lifetime. And for me to be at this time now with fruit, last year was the first year of fruit, and then this year we're getting quite a bit. This is a nice graft of proc on here. You can see pretty loaded. For the orchard to be at year 5 here and looking like this, it feels like it's worth the disturbance. And then on this side, you can see a lot of black locust clippings that we've cut and laid down here as a mulch. This is the easternmost row, and it comes up against a pretty dense thicket of multiflora rose and all kinds of, there's mugwort in here, there's goldenrod, some ash trying to survive the emerald ash borer onslaught, and all these black locusts, which are just so vigorous. They'll actually reach their roots all the way in to the planting holes. If you amend the planting holes of your trees, the black locust roots will smell it out and go over and get all of that fertility. So instead of just trying to cut them all down, we've been pollarding them every year and putting all of this really nice, lush, high nitrogen growth into the soil as a mulch here. And suppressing whatever perennial weeds are coming through and adding some fertility. So we're gonna go over to the orchard that we're gonna be working on, which is right down the hill here. And if I had thought about this a little bit more, I probably would have done the second one first, because it's in a more erosion-prone location. The pawpaws have really not put on as much growth. Last year there was a couple fruit. This year there's a few, but not many. It's a much slower growing tree, at least in this context of full sun. Neil Peterson and others tell me that the pawpaws will ultimately fruit better in this type of full sun climate here, but the shade seems to really help them out for the first several years, because I have a couple that are in the shade that are growing much faster than these. So here you can see the field is sloping downward. It's about 7 to 8%. So erosion is an issue in this field. A little bit of context is that before I bought this land 6 years ago, it was an annual vegetable farm. Much of it still is under my care. And although of course we've transitioned that from conventional to organic. And these fields were annual vegetable fields, and so they were in a rotation of lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, kale, things like that. And so this field was plowed and cultivated every year. They didn't really do any cover crops. It was pretty much just cash crop, cash crop, cash crop. And so that's really very harsh on the soil. From a tillage perspective, it was tilled about as much as any soil ever gets tilled. And so it's surprising to me that the soil is still in fairly decent health, but we're going to till it one more time. So the plan here is, unfortunately, this field is straight up and down the slope. So we're looking to the north and it's going downhill. So it's a north-facing aspect, which on paper is not the best thing, but the arc of the sun is more or less in the summer like this. So we're going to thin a little bit out of this tree line here, but not too much, because it really won't matter all that much in the end. These trees are going to get plenty of sun. The northern aspect is not something I'm very worried about. But unfortunately, the field is the long way downslope, meaning if I wanted to do anything like on contour swales or slightly off contour swales or key line patterning, draining water from the valley to the ridge, any of those things would be really logistically prohibitive from a management perspective if you're using anything with wheels. If I was going to do it all by hand, that would be one thing, but I'm not, and we're going to have to go up and down the hill. So that's a pretty big compromise. We are going to ensure that where the water flows downhill is going to be heavily, heavily mulched, and we might make some micro adjustments to bring that water up these micro valleys that we're going to form. So the general planting plan is, again, for ease of management, this is actually for producing fruit. This isn't for growing trees or for, habitat diversity, which it will be in a certain sense, but the main purpose is to actually grow fruit to sell. We are a market farm. We sell a lot of vegetables, and we want to have some actual fruit on the table. So this isn't a huge amount of fruit, but it will be enough for our farmers markets. And we're going to have to maintain it in a way that doesn't take up an enormous amount of time. So more or less, we're going to have 3 rows of trees, roughly 12 to 14 feet apart. and we're going to have a mowing aisle on the right, so I can get in here with the flail mower and mow the right side and keep this vegetation from creeping in too much. And then we'll be able to mow through the two middles of the rows here, the aisles, and then a mowing aisle on the left as well. And what we're gonna do to establish this, instead of just moldboard plowing this whole thing like you would normally to, you know, put in an annual crop, we're going to, if you're familiar, and I'll show you this process later, we'll actually have a video while we're doing it. If you're familiar with the moldboard plow, it flips the soil over to one side. I have a three bottom plow, and so it's going to flip three furrows over. And they flip it to one side, so I'm gonna go down one side of the field, flip them all this way, and then I'm gonna come from that side of the field backwards and flip them that way. And that's gonna be one planting bed. So it's going to be extra fluffy, extra deep soil, and then on the sides there will be, hopefully will be down to subsoil where the aisles are gonna be. So we're gonna do that 3 times. So we'll have low spots in between the rows, and the middle of the planting rows will be hopefully 2 cuts of soil high. So it should be about 9 inches higher, and the alleyways should be about 9 inches lower. Every time I've planted a tree in nice deeper soil, you really can see the increase in growth. It's phenomenal how much faster they grow. And we can't really, like I said, we can't really do that on contour here, because on contour would unfortunately be facing more or less across the field, which is really only 40 feet. And mowing in that direction just doesn't make any sense. It would be more, we'd spend way more time turning around than we would actually cutting anything. So the other things that I've prepared here are, first of all, I've been growing the trees for some of them. This will be their 2nd year, that are gonna eventually go in here. So there'll be 2-year-old nursery stock that I've been growing from seed, which I'll do a little bit of an explanation later on. And then last year we dumped really a huge amount of wood chips over on the side in anticipation. The 1 row of trees on this side is gonna go right here, right at the foot of this wood chips, which will then flip over onto the beds as we form them. And this stuff, I've added in a lot of mycelium. Are we gonna hit a patch? Yeah. So we've got stropharia, and it's really humming. There's a lot of insect life. Sorry, ants. We've been dropping some extra stuff from the sides and putting it on this wood chip mulch. So this is really, in some places this pile is about 18 inches deep, and it's about 400 feet long. So there's quite a few yards of material in here that we're gonna use to mulch all these trees as we put them in. And it's right where we want it, and it's been sitting here kind of molding into the landscape. There are a couple trees here on the field between here and the next fields that are gonna eventually become part of the scene. It's a really beautiful old mulberry here, and we're going to treat some of these trees. There's a couple cherries in there, and we're gonna treat them as part of the deal. So we're gonna cut back some more of this locust, some of the honeysuckle, mulch that down. And yeah, so that's an overview of the strategy that we're going to use to implement. We are probably going to, I still have to decide whether I want to plant in this fall or plant them in the next spring. It's going to be determined by how long it takes to do a little bit more brush clearing on the sides, probably trim out a few more of these trees. And I think what I'm gonna do is get those all up to the top at the end of that other orchard where we were up there, sequester that off aside, and then probably put that into biochar once we get into the fall, and then apply that. So I'll plow here. We'll probably mulch in the aisles where the low points are, where the water would accumulate, so that we don't get any real runoff over the, sorry, my neighbor is out having fun early in the morning. And so we're going to stop that water up with wood chips and other mulch and branches in the aisles, and then cover crop the beds probably with something that will predominantly winter kill, and so that we'll have a nice decomposing mulch to plant the trees into next spring. That's probably where I'm leaning with that. So that was a little bit of an overview, introduction to how we're gonna pull this off. And next time we'll probably talk about species, and I'll introduce you to the trees that have been growing in situ, where they're gonna actually be dug up probably in the fall or spring and planted out here. All right, thanks for watching.